Hey guys, my name is Toby and welcome back to another exciting Photoshop tutorial. Now today we're going to be answering a question that I was recently posed about a very specific Photoshop technique, which is how to pull off this effect here. And this is something you see a lot with sports photography. I think this particular person wanted to do it with birds though, in wildlife and that sort of thing. So they're taking a sequence of images of a bird snatching some food, I think she said. And wanted to pull off this kind of multiple motion effects. It's kind of almost like a cloning effect to some extent. But like I say, you see this a lot in sports photography. It's done very often for some reason with snowboarding, I've noticed. Yeah, let's jump straight in. Okay, so I'm just going to close this and we're not going to save. Now, what we could do if I just bring up Finder here is these 6 or 8 images we've got here, we could open these in Photoshop and then copy paste them all into one image, and then we can start doing clever things to them. But there is actually a much easier way to stack up your photos, and you can do that by going to File, and then you could go to Open. But what you're going to do is you can go down to Scripts, and then you're just going to go to this one, which you can just see on the bottom of my recording here, which is Load Files into Stack. Okay, and this is going to bring up a little dialog window, and we're just going to browse to the location of our files, which in this case are here. And I'm just going to hold Shift to select, in this case, the images that we're using are Skate Park 55 to Skate Park 62. I'm going to hit Open. And then what we also want to do is we want to automatically attempt to align the source images, because while they were shot on a tripod, there is a chance that during the exposure or during the sequence it might have moved slightly. It's just going to try and put everything as much as it can on top of itself, which is very handy. This is also good if you're trying to do HDR or a lot of composite work. If you're trying to do that sort of thing, this can work really well. So I'm going to hit OK. Okie dokie. And what it's going to do, it's just going to take a second here to load all these images up and try and sort of sort them all out and get them so they're all lined up properly. Here we go. So depending on how many images you're doing and how big the files are, this may or may not take a long amount of time or a short amount of time. I'm also working off a laptop, so that might factor into it. It's quite a fast laptop, but you know, if you're on a high-speed desktop, it might go a little bit quicker. Okay, so the first problem we have is that the first image we took is on top. As you might also be able to see, if I just zoom in here, because it has allowed this extra space, we've also got some blank pixels around the edge of our frame. So what we're going to have to do towards the end is just crop this in a little bit. In fact, we could do that now. Just get our original aspect ratio, which actually it's not going to be quite original, so we'll do 2:3, 3:2, and then just a little bit, crop it in. I'm just holding Alt there to keep that ratio the same. I'm going to hit Enter to confirm that crop. There we go. Okay, so now the problem is we actually want this image here that's on the top of our layer stack to be on the bottom. So unfortunately what we're going to have to do is just reorder these layers so that they stack up the right way. And I'm just going to do that quickly, and I'll see you in a moment when I've done that. Now that I've done that, you can see that the very bottom one is 55 and then they go up sequentially to 62. Okay, so this is where the painstaking editing starts to come into it. So what I'm going to do first of all, I'm just going to turn off all of these layers except for the bottom one and the one above it. Now what we're going to do is onto the second layer, we're going to add a layer mask. And if you've not worked with masks before, basically this is a way where we can selectively erase certain parts of layers, but you still have all the detail there. So if you let's just show you what I mean. What we have to do is on this white box, if you select your brush tool, it will default to colors black and white, which are the only colors you can paint with in here. But with this mask selected, if I start painting with black, you're going to notice that he's going to start to disappear. And this is because basically what we're doing is we're using this as what's known as an alpha channel. So if I hold Alt or Option on the Mac and you click on this box, you're going to see what I've actually just painted, which is this black sort of smudge. But what this is saying is the corresponding area on this layer, that bit is going to be transparent and this bit is going to be opaque. And if anything's kind of grey, then that will be semi-transparent, so you get like a 50% sort of fade. But anyway, let's just, I'm just going to make my brush quite big, hit paint with white and just undo that effectively. Okay, so what we actually want to do is we want to see the layer underneath. So I'm just going to hit with the mask selected. This is important because if you actually paint on here with your black or white brush, you are painting with black or white, and that's not a great look. So you want to make sure with the mask selected, not the layer, you want to invert this. So I'm going to do this by pressing Command or Control on the PC and I. And now this whole thing's gone black and he's disappeared. So if we turn this layer on and off, it's not going to do anything because you're telling this layer to be completely transparent. Okay, so now I'm just going to zoom in here and make my brush a little bit smaller and then a little bit harder as well. Not too hard, about 50%. And then with white, I'm just going to start to kind of paint over where the bike is. And you don't have to be particularly careful with this, purely because if you do make a mistake, you don't have to edit undo and go back to the point where you didn't make the mistake. You can literally just paint it back in. And it's as easy as that. So there we go. And that's, yeah, we just go up to where the trees are, so there's no weirdness going on there. Okay, so now what we're going to have to do is, it's not quite perfect around here. So I'm going to make my brush a bit smaller and quite a lot harder. And now I'm going to paint with black because what we've actually got, if I just solo this layer, this is what we now have. We've got just him kind of there. But we've got all of this bit of the wall here, so all of this bit here, which we don't really want. We want this mask to end kind of on the wheel. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. We could just come in here with a brush, paint with black, with a fairly hard brush, and we could just come in here and just be very careful about how we do this, and we could just do it by hand, and that's fine. So that's pretty good. That's about as good as that needs to be. Now you could come in here and you could paint in between all these little spokes if you really wanted to. I mean, you could sit in here and, you know, paint the wheel underneath, but then you've got to be so careful about it, and then you'd have to be very specific about how hard your brush was as well to make sure the edges look right. And to be honest, in this particular case, it's probably more effort than it's worth, particularly because we're going to do something a little bit different later anyway. Okay, so we have our first two layers done, and now it's just a case of rinse and repeat. So I'm going to turn on our third layer. I'm going to add a mask, and I'm going to invert it using Command or Control I, and then I'm going to paint with a white brush, and I'm just going to kind of roughly paint in where he is. Okay, now we are starting to lose this one underneath again, and that is because this layer is sort of extending over it. So just going to make sure that that's all nice and opaque. Now there is another way of doing this a little bit more accurately than attempting to do it purely with just by hand. And you could sit and do it by hand, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but I think this is a slightly more accurate way of doing it. And what I'm going to do is, now I've taken the pen tool, and with this lets you make very precise selections. So what you do is you click and hold to define a point, and then you can kind of add a curve to it. And the trick is to make the little handles, these is called Bezier curves if you're interested, and you just make the handle kind of follow the direction that it needs to go. Okay, so we've got a corner here, so we might want to be a little bit more careful. And you can be very, very precise with these to make a cutout. Now, the reason I'm using the pen tool rather than another selection tool is because the background of this is quite busy, so a lot of the automatic selection tools aren't really doing a good job. I have had a little play with it and they just don't really cut it, so we're going to do it this way instead. And we're just going to draw kind of around our tire where the two layers are going to overlap. There we go. And that's going to just about do it. And then we're just going to sort of click up here, and then just when you mouse over the initial point, you get the little O kind of appear underneath the pen. Click that, and that's going to create a path. Now, what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to go to the Paths panel, and it's now got this work path, which is what we've got selected here. You need to right-click and go to Make Selection, and that's all fine. So now we have a selection based on the path that we've just created. So come back over to our layers, click on our mask, and now what we can do is we actually need to invert this selection because it's selected the area inside of the bit we just drew. We actually want to select the area outside. So to do that, you need to inverse your selection, which you can either do by going to Select and then Inverse, or the keyboard shortcut that I find I use quite a lot is Command or Control Shift I. So Command I, Control I will just invert the image. If you add a shift into that, so Command Shift I, you invert your selection. And if you notice, there's now a dotted line going around the edge of the picture as well, suggesting that this bit is what we have selected. So, got our selection. We're going to click on our mask. Going to hit the B button for the brush tool, and I'm just going to make that a bit bigger with the square brackets. Okay, and then we need to paint this with black. So now what we're going to do is we need to be a little bit careful kind of when we get up to about here, but we'll just make our brush a bit smaller. And we can just kind of, without fear, because we've made a selection, we can just kind of go over this and it's fine. And now I'm going to hit Command D to deselect, and that's done. Now, that does seem like quite a lengthy process compared to painting it in, but it is more accurate. And also, if I wasn't kind of demoing this at the same time, you could do that quite quickly. So what I'll do now is I'll just kind of talk for a little bit while I do the next one. So we're just going to add a mask, invert. With our brush tool, we're going to paint white kind of all over where he is. There we go. Okay, and now we're going to go to the pen tool. Actually, what I'm going to do as well is, because we don't need this old selection, I'm just going to delete that. We're going to come back onto our image, and then with the pen tool, just going to very quickly, kind of roughly, I mean, you don't even need to be that precise, because the thing is, it's only where they actually cross that you need to be like really, really accurate. So kind of in here, you're going to want to be fairly accurate. If you do get this wrong, what you can do is if you hold Alt down, it'll go to this little triangle thing when you go over one of the handles on the curve, and you can actually adjust it afterwards as well. Oops, there's spotlight search, don't want that. I'm just going to come around here. And so this can be quite a quick process, but it does depend how much detail you really want to put in there. I mean, you might not need very much detail. You might just need like a rough outline of something. But the pen tool is a very precise way of making a manual selection. So normally I would default to using one of the kind of automatic selection tools. But in this particular instance, because you've got all this nonsense going on in the background, because it's all in focus and a pain, basically, it's actually easier to do this sort of manual selection. You could sit there with the lasso tool for hours and not get anywhere with it, but this works just as well. I'm just going to make a selection from our path now, and with our mask selected, I'm going to hit Command Shift I to invert, hit our brush tool, and we're going to paint with black kind of around here. Okay, so the path needs to be a little bit better there, but we'll go down to there, and then we'll, just for the sake of time, we'll just manually do that bit. So I'm going to deselect. I'm just going to come in here and make sure that we get that all nice and masked in. And we could even, I think in this particular case I will, I'm going to come up here to where I know that tyre would come round and just do this little bit as well. I mean, you can get really, really particular about this if you want. I mean, it's kind of up to you as to how much detail you want to leave in your mask and how much you want to not worry with. But there we go, that looks pretty good. Okay, and as I say, it is really just a case of rinse and repeat. So I'm going to do the rest of these and I'll join you again in a minute. Okay, so that is now done, and there's just one final thing we need to do to get this image looking kind of like it did before, and that is we're actually going to change the opacity of some of these layers. Now, remember that this one is sort of on the top, so it shouldn't really matter too much what we do with all of the other ones. Okay, so there is a quicker way of doing this. What you could do is you could select your layer, come up to opacity, and slide it down and do something like that. But there is a much better way of doing it. Now, you have to be on the move tool for this to work, because if you're on the brush tool or something else, or the clone stamp or something like that, it will actually change this value. But if you're on the move tool and then you tap number keys, you can change the opacity. So I can actually change this to 50% just by pressing 5, and it's going to go down to 50%. Or if you want it to be something like 86%. If you tap 8 and 6 very quickly, it'll do that. If you just tap 8 or you just tap 6, it will go to 80 and 60 and whatever. So we're going to have this one as 80. And we're going to go down one, and we'll have that one as 70. That one as 60. And then I think what I did in the original was all of the other ones were just at 50% opacity. Because I found that, oops, didn't mean to double click there. As soon as you get down to anything less than that, it starts to go a little bit funny. Okay, now we do have a problem because what we've actually got here is if we make this layer 50% opacity, this happens, which is a problem. But there is a way around it. Now, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to add a mask to this layer, and we're going to have to invert that, and then we're just going to put in, using the white brush, we're just going to put the guy on the bike in there. Now, need to come up to our final image, and what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this layer. So I'm going to hit Command J to duplicate it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the layer mask, and then I'm going to drag this right the way down and put this at the bottom. There we go, and there's our background layer. And as you can see, we've now got this quite cool effect where all of the cyclists kind of fade out in this sequential pattern. And I think that is just about going to do it this time, guys. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Toby, and we'll see you next time.